cool. And talking with Wyatt about the thread of the second foundation and the sequel to Poker Without Cards. And the part that I want to talk about presently, or I'm about to talk about, want to, God willing, and the creek don't rise. I really don't get how that's two separate things, God willing and the creek don't rise. Is the creek out of God's will? I don't know. Right? So there's part of what astounds me presently are perspectives of a past lover who produced a video, and some might not care for that framing. But you know someone differently as a lover than you might out there. And so am I kissing and telling? Yeah, I don't think she'll mind. Julie Foster produced a movie with her boyfriend. So they're lovers. I mean, there's a lot more sex in this story than I was planning on. But Silenced, I think, is the name of it. And I love Julie. Huge heart space, goes both ways. And our politics are so amazingly different. And she has long felt persecuted for being a conservative in advertising. And that fascinates me because I've felt persecuted for being a liberal in advertising. And she's still getting paid, and I'm not. And in her victimhood, she did get fired from a job like a year ago. Victimhood. Well, because a lot of conservatives will call me a snowflake or a victim or other things, labels, or if not me, to my face. Sure feels like it in some of what I hear on alternative media on the right-hand side of the dial. Dr. Seuss has a wonderful poem that I love. It keeps disappearing from online, or at least appears that way to me on why do so many things go right on his stories on thinking. I need to read that again. Maybe the gentle folk will do it at an open mic as a public service announcement. But this notion about breeding people to see themselves as wronged. Breeding people to see themselves as wronged. In Marx and Engels, in the paper that they published just before the Communist Manifesto, they wrote a treatise on the linguistics of the ruling class, the language of the ruling class, and talked about how the stratification of language creates class systems, and that among those that are empowered, among the elite, that 90% of the elite don't recognize what they're doing. They're not active contributors to the elite structure. So that 90% are completely unaware. Right. And that 10% are active proponents. And so I imagine Julie Foster as in that 90%. I don't put her in that 10%, even though she's producing documentaries. Because I view her as seeing herself as victimized. And not seeing it the way I see it, as a game for power. She works in advertising. She's a career media woman. And I imagine she doesn't see it as a game for power. To me, it is. I tend more towards Robert Anton Wilson's maybe logic. And I love his sentence that at some point I imagine I might memorize where Robert Anton Wilson, or it's quoted with Discordian text, so maybe it's not attributed to him, but I've heard him say it. He might be quoting someone else. Everything is in some ways true, in some ways false, in some ways true and false, in some ways false and true.
In whichever other way you want to put it together.
Right. So I circumnavigate saying it is what it is. No, I don't circumnavigate saying it is what it is. I circumnavigate saying what it is. Right. I mean, it appears to me as a game, and that's true in some ways, and false in others, and true and false and true. And it's a fun little merry-go-round. And then I talk about loop-de-loops. And I'm glad we're in Nasarima land, as opposed to that harsh Attican land. And so when I have events like being at Lau's birthday party and a discussion I shared with you about a New Testament Bible being on the front porch and me seeking to make perhaps common ground, make conversation with a woman I found attractive. And I say to her, it's convenient to have that outside. And she goes, absolutely. And I said, I had one too when I lived in Burnsville. And she goes, oh, that's great. I said, but I caught some flack because it was outside, so it would get wet. But my thought was that it's God's rain. And someone used the word blasphemous, which didn't quite seem right to me because it's not me saying something. And she goes, and I'm thinking that a response I don't want to say expect, and I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this, but people will look for an excuse to get angry. And she goes, and she validated me. She goes, I don't see it that way at all. She goes, it's funny what people get upset about when you look around and you see all these pagan idols attacking us. Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing. You see pagan idols attacking you all over the place. That's a fascinating, that's got to be tiring. Fending off all those attacks. I certainly don't want to talk to you about my perspectives of Easter. And I can see how she feels silenced. I can see how she feels that she's not able to speak her mind, or she'll get attacked, which compounds her feeling like she's getting attacked. There are all these fucking pagans attacking her. And I don't want to hang out with her that much. I'm afraid I'm going to say something that she finds attacking, because I have a very different perspective on the dynamic of who attacked whom and pagan imagery used in the church. And I know Shakespeare's no gospel, but I like his line of the devil will use gospel for his own purposes. Right. So then I see certain books like Orson Scott Card's direct sequel to Ender's Game, where he talks about needing to be able to communicate with your team without speaking language directly, knowing that you're being observed. Right. That makes sense. Those are important structures to think through. Fortunately, back in my interest in my teens and my 20s, I read a certain amount about secret codes, and I learned Morse code, and I actually tried a few. And I studied with some people at Caltech when I was like 14 that were really good like that. And I'm not talking about the adults that were working with us. I'm talking about the other 14-year-olds in the group. People are like, Ben, have you ever been in a room or a group where you have absolutely known that you are the least smart of that group? And it's absolutely Caltech. It was this computer programming thing. 20 twice, actually. I also got invited into the Carnegie Mellon Accelerated Math program between 7th and 8th grade, and I lasted 2 days, and I needed to be out of there. It's a huge fight with my mom. I was the only one in that group not wearing glasses. I hadn't wanted to go, so I missed the first day. Finally went basically because my mom was terrorizing me into it. Everyone there was so much fucking smarter than me in a weird way. It was like in The Simpsons where they're doing math jokes and it's just going past me. And I'm like, I do not belong. I will slow these people down. This is not my tribe. Now, the Caltech thing, I did the whole course, and as computer programmers have learned and gangsters knew, you need a comedian in your group. And I'm like smart enough to joke their language.
Right.
I can't connect the dots the way that they do. I'll fuck that up. Like, everyone knows to check Ben's code. Can you help cheer up John? Or John needs a different approach. Can you give him some alternative perspectives? Yeah, I'm good at that. Right, I got this one. Should I order pizza? Yeah, okay, I got that too. That's 2 things I'm doing for this group. So in Isaac Asimov's Second Foundation, he has a structure that he set up in the first short story based on Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West, which takes magic literally. I often take magic literally. I often hear magical language out there. I'm grateful to not be a member of any tribe of people playing with shit. I mean, I used to be a Discordian. I think I was able to marry somebody by having an affiliation with the Church of the Subgenius. And don't imagine that I want to show up at their Pleasure Dome ceremony. I think it's amazing, and they converse with aliens, I think, and pleasure domes. And so I think a lot of people would have a lot of fun there. Not my scene. Right. And if we take Oswald Spengler's words literally, and we take Isaac Asimov's good wishes for humanity seriously and literally, and look at what kind of foundational ideas he wanted to give us to help our species survive. And I hear Orson Scott Card in his inquiries into biology and morality look at survival as being, perhaps, if survival is not within the aesthetic of the ruling elite, it's time for the other 7 tribes to step forward and find a way to redistribute the magic. I might be making some leaps, and I'm also trying to condense, trying to nutshell a big idea. And so Oswald Spengler was certainly influential on both Isaac Asimov as well as on his the person who was buying stories for some science fiction magazines, or at least one. And he pitched the idea of doing a story about modernizing Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West. And the guy's like, I love it, do it. So he writes a story. And it's really well received. So he writes another one. And it's really well received. And he writes a third, and now he's got a thing. And so that's how he built his early career and wealth, although perhaps some would use the word ironically. Sometimes my persecutory thinking imagines that stuff fucked with him, that there were flying monkeys that came through, financial flying monkeys. The publishing company that originally, so it got really, really popular, and then they decided to publish it as a trilogy. And they took the first 12 stories and published it as if it was 3 separate books. Or 4, I forget, I think it's 4 stories for each one, maybe it's 3. But it's like, maybe there were 9. You get the idea, it's a trilogy, made the trilogy. And then science fiction was booming, and they had a science fiction and fantasy convention, and it was voted as the best trilogy ever published. And Tolkien fans were irate, and in my mind, rightly so. He hadn't written it as a trilogy. A lot of stuff going on, but there were more sci-fi folks than there were fantasy folks, and people were going, holy fucking shit, this is amazing, because it works on a lot of different levels. So the book entitled The Second Foundation is actually the first where he starts writing as an actual novel. And part of the premise that he sets up is that, a premise he had already set up was that when the foundation was launched, that there was actually 2 foundations, a public one and a secret one. And I don't think it's too big of a spoiler to say that by the 4th novel, by the 4th book, we've substantiated that magical powers can be real and that they can influence society. I happen to look at advertising and market research as largely that study of human engineering. And so I view that as magic, M-A-G-I-C-K. Human engineering to me is magic, M-A-G-I-C-K. M-A-G-I-C is me entertaining a group on stage. That's what I do. But when I'm using deception or human engineering or persuasion tunnels with the intention of being effective, I'm now speaking with my whole body in a language that appears to me as the meaning of my words and body expressions is the reaction I get from others. To me, that's a language of domination. That's a language of oppression. That's a Catholic language. I'm using Catholic to mean the literal sense of all-encompassing. It cracks me up when on OkCupid, a woman will say, I'm Catholic, but it's not important to me. Well, I'm looking for a guy that knows what he wants. Wow. Huh. Yeah. No. Next. Edison or Tesla? Who's Tesla? Next. So I want to look at where we are on time, and I'm going to hit stop on